And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and we missed a week. I know. The one rule all the podcasting everybody says is consistency is what's most important. You can't ever miss a week. And to that I say, whatever, dude. I'm going to do what I want. Actually, it wasn't so much what I wanted. My entire family got strep throat, and then the holidays, and this is going to happen every once in a while. I will endeavor to make a weekly show to the best of my ability, but if at any point I have to make a choice between doing something that my kids require of me and making this show, I'm sorry, the show's gonna fail every time, and I'm gonna go with my kids. That being said, I do have a little bit of a backlog of content that I want to try to push out here and do a couple of shows this week, make up for missed last week. And what that's gonna look like is today I have 2 new cards to spoil from the upcoming Convictions expansion pack. Now, this is going to be another one of those 25 card expansions, so you will get a fixed roster of cards in every one of these that you purchase. Some of the things that are different from previous 25 card expansions, there will be no foil pack. So the 1 foil pack per box of 12 is completely gone, and this brings the price down by $5 a box. I think this is a positive move. The difference between paying $75 for a playset of these expansion pack cards and $60, I realize it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but at least for me, that's a tipping point. $60 is still within the range of okay, not unreasonable. I get all the cards. And $75 is where it starts to sting, particularly considering some of the inclusions on previous expansion packs, which is another point that I think ARG deserves a little bit of credit for. They have said that there will not be any cards in this expansion that are going to be like the preview cards, like what we had in Genesis and then Revelations, which I've complained about on this show before. I'm not going to get into that today. There will be 5 of the 20 cards will be full art reprints of previously existing cards. So for my money, they didn't 100% get the message that if you're asking for us to buy cards in this somewhat more cost prohibitive fashion, that at least for me personally, I would like to see all of the cards be exclusive to those expansions. Now, if the cards they choose to do full art reprints of are high value cards that see a lot of play, that's cool. That's not terrible. And I understand that part of what they need to do, every card development requires resources to be put in. They need to figure out ways to make money on those resources on the back end. I get all that, but I'm a player, so my perspective is always going to be from that of somebody who has to go out and buy these things. And I definitely think that full art promos in LGS kits and prize wall, that makes all the sense in the world. Having those stamped cards in the booster packs makes all the sense. These are all things for people who are inclined to the chase. These are things for them to chase. These LCG style packs, having reprint cards and having to buy multiple copies of cards that I don't necessarily need at admittedly a lower price this time around. This part of their distribution model might not still be exactly optimal, I guess is my point, but I think it is a real positive thing that so early into the game's life they went, hey, these sets aren't landing well with the community. What can we do to make them better? And they've taken steps in a couple of different ways to try to improve the overall quality of these booster packs, expansion packs. So this is another thing to totally go on a segue. I really like that they are doing this type of expansion model. I was a fan of the Hearthstone campaign model, where you would get a booster expansion and then you would get an expansion where you knew all the cards, they were fixed, you just had to play through this story mode to unlock all of them. Not exactly the same here in Argent Saga, but very similar. And I think it's really cool to mix up how things are distributed. We've got a good stream of promos coming through LGSs. We've got the booster pack expansion, so people who really enjoy that lottery pack feeling, they get that. People who want to chase singles, obviously anybody can chase singles. And then you've got this LCG style releases. I think it's cool. I don't think they've got it exactly perfect, but they're willing to make changes and they've got a good framework. So my segue aside, here we are 5 minutes into the show, haven't even got to the cards that I'm going to spoil. And I haven't mentioned the other things that are on tap. So I have a lengthy conversation between me and Kaylin Nilsson about the Orlando event. And I also have a fairly brief phone interview with Alex Blandon about his experiences at the Orlando event. These are in the pipeline and will hopefully be released to shows in the coming days. Now, let's get to the actual exciting stuff that I have to talk about, and that is new cards from Conviction. So I got one light card and I got one air card to discuss. First up, the Commander of Light. This is a 3-cost, 1500 power unit. It has the Night tag, and it has the power Exhaust. Recover all units adjacent to this card. They cannot deal damage until the end of the turn. There is some promise here if you have units that have Guardian, or you have units that are high value enough that you want to try to protect them. You could swing with your, say, Black Rose Knight, do his card draw shenanigans, and then exhaust a Commander of Light to ready that unit, protect it from being attacked. And if Sola is your spirit, you can then ready the Commander of Light, and you can actually get 2 attacks off on your board and have 0 of those units be vulnerable to counterattack. Now, also Guardian is a factor here. You could swing in with your Sola token or your Light Tower token, crack a tower, and then you could stand him back up using this Commander of Light. And again, if Soul is your spirit, you stand the Commander back up at the end of turn, and you have a board that you got value out of, and you don't have to pay the price of vulnerability on the back end. 1500 power for a 3-cost, that's fine. That's not super exciting. It's not behind the curve to the point where you're really paying a huge cost for what could be a fairly impactful ability. I think it does count as a drawback, or a balance maybe, on this card, that you have to exhaust it to use this power. So you can't attack with this 1500 unit as well as the other 2 and then get 2 guys back. I do think it's hard to look at this card and not go, man, it'd sure be cool if after those units stood up, I could attack with them again. And you can attack with them again, they just can't deal damage. So there would be no reason to attack with those units again. That wouldn't make any sense. This does say that the units adjacent to the card are not targeted. It just says recover those units. So this wouldn't trigger Reparo-Bloom, thank goodness. That would be annoying, and Reparo-Bloom is annoying enough without additional high-quality triggers. So I think really there's 2 major use cases for the Commander of Light. It's to protect your board, so you build up a swarmy board that maybe the power is there to crack towers, but if you start losing cards, you're going to overall run out of gas like aggro tends to. So by allowing your units to stand back up, your board becomes stickier, a little bit harder to deal with. They can't just send regular attacks into it. They need something, either an effect or a card with target attack or brawler. And obviously Guardian. I feel like Guardian is probably going to be the more likely use case for this card, where you're going to have your token or some other Guardian card that you've got some effects, or I mean, look at what Light is doing right now. We've got a lot of gear and we've got a lot of weenie units. So I envision this slotting into a deck with small units that you stack your gears on, and you want to be able to attack, but then also guard to maybe protect another unit that's not adjacent to your Commander of Light. So you stand up your Guardians, or you stand up your weenies to protect them from being hit on the crackback. Is this card going to see play? I don't think this is going to be a 3-of anywhere. I think the kind of deck that you want to slot this into is going to have a lot of small units. So if you're building your deck to have big bombs, you're not going to get full value out of this card. Now, being able to, I don't know, swing with an Ikuma Juggernaut and then stand it back up and have it ready to Guardian, that seems really good, but it also doesn't really feel like what the Commander of Light wants to do. To my eye, this card wants to fit into a deck with a bunch of little units, and this might be nearing the top of that deck's curve. So I think at most you're going to see a Commander of Light maybe as a 2-of in some decks that want to be able to squeeze every drop of value out of these small units as they attack and then ready them to protect. I don't think this card is going to be more than a 2-of. On the edge, it's not bad, but it's definitely not going to be a staple in the format going forward, I don't think. Next up, we have a air card. This is a 2-cost, 2000 power Grove Elemental. This artwork is impossibly adorable. It is just the cutest little card. In addition to having the most adorable artwork ever, the Grove Elemental has the power Arrive. If you played at least 2 other cards this turn, put the top card of your Shard deck into play. So this is some pretty decent ramp. Now, on turn 2, if I can play 2 other cards, then play the Grove Elemental, and I get an extra shard to ramp up to turn 3, that's a pretty big increase in my overall Shardlight available. However, how often are you going to be able to play a total of 3 cards on turn 2? That seems difficult. The other thing about this guy is it's a 2-cost 2,000 power unit. We don't have that many of those in the game currently, and that still is a very juicy stat line for the 2 slot. So playing this guy as a 2-drop on turn 2 means you get a lot of stats on the board for not a whole lot of Shardlight. And that seems like gravy. Oh, late game I can ramp. Not that you necessarily want to ramp late game. That's maybe not the most useful thing, but it's a little bit of upside to what might be a dead card. A lot of 2-drops are dead cards late in the game. Grove Elemental has the ability to give you a little bit of extra juice when it comes into play. All of that, however, ignores the other text on the card, which is, whenever this card leaves the field, your opponent may destroy one of your shards. This is a fairly significant drawback. So first off, let's look at the language on that. When this card leaves the field, your opponent may destroy one of your shards. If you're showing a Corona Crystal and this guy dies, your opponent is killing your Corona Crystal. Maybe they go after Zephyr Crystal, depending upon the matchup. Either way, this choice is not up to you. Therefore, it is guaranteed to select whatever shard is in your shard zone that is going to be the worst for you. That is a pretty significant drawback. Now, is it enough of a drawback that you don't play this card? What kind of deck is this card going to go into? I think this card is going to go into a deck that's kind of similar to the first card I talked about, that is going to focus on playing lots of small air units and doing a lot of shenanigans, bouncing them back to hand, dropping them back into play. This kind of just a bounce deck, essentially. So if you've got a bunch of little units that are doing things as they go in and out of your hand, and you're not necessarily trying to fight for board control in a fair way, well then, does losing 1 shard late in the game matter at all? If the most expensive card that's in my deck is like a 3-drop or a 4-drop, and we're talking turn 7, and I lose a shard, who cares? Like, whatever, I can still play my whole hand this turn. That's irrelevant. Now, losing a Corona Ruby when you're really counting on that shard as one of your outs against some kind of big threatening monster on the other side of the board, that could be a big deal. Losing a Zephyr Crystal or a Hallowed Crystal if you need that disruption, or you're counting on that extra little buff to your Guardian guys, that could also be kind of a big deal. So part of what you have to factor in with this is not just that you're losing the Shardlight to be able to play whatever size threat next turn, you're also losing, guaranteed, you're going to be losing access to whatever special crystal is showing. There's no reason your opponent would ever go, oh yeah, I'm going to take your full art Argent Shard instead of your Corona Ruby. So that has to be considered, that this doesn't just say lose a crystal when it leaves field. It says lose whatever your best crystal is given the game state at that time. Or we're assuming your opponent is going to make a misplay. And I don't think we should ever assume your opponent is going to make a misplay. I do think this card is going to see play. I think the ramp effect is absolutely relevant in a world where we can play that 0-cost Ziliax guy and then play a 0-cost air spell that returns him to your hand, and then you can play this guy on turn 2 and ramp and have a 2,000 power body. Maybe that doesn't happen every time. Maybe that's kind of an edge case where it works out perfectly, but we're already playing mutations in this format, and we're already playing in a very fast format. So I don't think the drawback is that catastrophic given how important it might be to be able to get one turn. If I'm playing a 4-drop on turn 3 after playing this guy, in some matchups, that power spike might just be enough. I mean, not necessarily a 4-drop, but playing 4 Shardlight worth of stuff. I fill my board, I've got a big threatening presence, and I just run you over. Yeah, I go back down after you get my Grove Elemental with your Fire Tower or whatever, or even worse, give me the Air Tower, and then you kill one of my shards. I play this guy again, you kill another one of my shards. But even that scenario, it just doesn't seem that bad. I mean, compared to other 2,000 power 2-drops, you've got like the Azure Guardian in water, where dude can't attack, and he just sits there. So yeah, it's a good wall, but it's not it's not doing anything proactive to help you win the game. This thing is helping you win the game by not only putting a good amount of tempo into playing now, you get a big beefy unit for 2 cost. It also gets you ahead on your next turn, provided your opponent can't just deal with this thing outright with like Dust Strike or something, which could happen. Some attention does need to be paid to the potential downside on this guy, which is you're in a position where your back's against the wall already on turn 2. You have to play him for 2 Shardlight. You don't have the ability to pull off the other cards being played, and you get this guy out and your opponent immediately has an answer that deals with him, and now you go from having a 2 cost 2000 power unit on turn 2 to having an empty board and only 1 shard going into turn 3. That could be really bad. And while that situation could happen, I would generally suggest don't play this guy into that kind of board state. If you're playing against water, don't throw this guy out naked on turn 2, because you're going to get hit with an ASB and your hand's going to get flooded and you're going to lose a shard. This card does, I think, require some level of player skill to understand when there are times that playing this guy is just pure downside and pure risk. If you can't protect him and you're not going to get an attack with that 2000 power and you can't get the ramp effect, it could be real bad to throw this dude out on the board. All of that being said, if you pair this guy with, say, water, and you run something like an Akuma Silencer, or whatever the Argent Watcher is, the guy that, if there's ways that you could play this unit out and then after his arrivability happens, silence him before you kill him, or bounce him back to your hand, which air would be quite good at. So I mean, that's a line of play that I think is worth considering. You play this guy, you get the ramp, you play something that silences him, and then you return him to your hand. That could be pretty reasonable. You could have an air deck that's trying to ramp into something big by repeatedly playing the Grove Elemental, and then once you get your big thing off, like you get your Celestial of Genesis out, and I get to take 2 turns in a row, then at that point, does this drawback matter anymore? So I think this card probably is going to find a home in a fast, aggressively paced air deck, kind of like the Edson Barboza wheel kick deck I really enjoyed playing before I realized relying on augments makes no sense in a world where Zephyr Crystal exists. I think it could fit into that kind of deck. I also think this guy could have a home in some kind of slower, more control-y or combo-based air deck where you're playing him for his effect and you're playing games to dance around having to suffer through the drawback part of this card. I think Grove Elemental is a good card. I think this card could see play in a couple different deck archetypes, and I'm going to have to get my hands on it and actually play with it to see if either of these ideas that I have actually work out. So given that Conviction is essentially a 20 card expansion, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the overall meta. Therefore, I think it's likely that fast decks using, say, light and air will continue to be fairly well featured in the format. And I think both of the cards that I talked about today have a chance of being included in those types of faster, aggressive decks. Thank you again to ARG for including me in the spoiler train for Conviction. I love doing this kind of stuff, and the look on my boy's face when I get to show him cards that nobody else has seen yet is just absolutely priceless. So I'm very appreciative of that opportunity, both to talk about the stuff on the show and to be a hero to my kid. Until next time, go win some games.